So I sometimes start, when I'm going to do a new drawing, I start looking at the last one I did. Other times I've already folded over the page, but sometimes it's, I don't know. I don't know what it is about looking at the last one, but um, just a reminder of where I ended there and whether I want to kind of continue the feeling of that maybe, or whether I want to go somewhere completely different. So um, fairly immediately here, I picked a bit of a, I don't know, the palette. I grabbed. You can see two of those paints are orange, and two of the paints are pretty pretty neutral to the degree of one's like a just kind of a warm creamy white, and one's this kind of very light, almost kind of creamy greeny gray color. Um, Kind of, it's almost like a clay or a putty kind of color. Um, and I don't know, there's something about when I first, if I start with putting down paint, since I don't always start with putting down paint, but if I start with putting down paint, there's something about choosing those initial colors that sort of, I don't know, I'm making, you can see, you can barely see that white, but there's a choice being made there anyway. Like any sort of first mark kind of choice, but in this sense, I think my thinking was start very neutral. Um, that doesn't always mean that it's going to be kind of flat or minimal in its neutralness, if that makes sense. But there's a choice here to just have this very almost like receding gray, as if the page itself, the pages in this ledger are already this very kind of yellow, kind of warm yellow tone. Just old paper that is not very high quality paper that has with the kind of age and acid content has gone more yellow over time. So I don't know, just making a choice there. And I think oftentimes you see, like the last drawing that I posted, there's, when I'm using that big palette knife, mostly it's about kind of just spreading in, getting motion into the kind of this kind of ground level, this kind of starting level, getting the initial motion in there in big blocks. And you can see the first kind of colors, the gray and the white, are fairly square, but then there's a choice here to sort of not try and square things off as much yet. Anyway, I may still go back, but sometimes I really like these, especially if it's a smaller amount of paint and it's drying faster. It kind of makes these smudgy, bubbly kind of marks at the edges. And I quite like that as a starting place. Like I say, it's about motion and sort of and levels of interest that are in here, because obviously I always kind of, I don't know what I'm going to draw in any of these cases, but I always know that I'm not going to end at this stage. I'm not going to end, maybe not every single time, but I'm mostly not going to end at this sort of loose color blocked kind of stage. Like the colors to me are, like I say, they're a starting point. They're kind of to get that first set of both the motion of that paint, but also the kind of the feeling of certain tones. The other reason, obviously, choosing that initial very neutral gray is something like this. You saw it even in the last drawing that I posted. I turned to that one orange very frequently. It just has this. It has this real warmth and depth, and it's not. I don't know. not too dark, not too light. It's actually, because it's an orange, a lot of oranges are often a little bit thinner. And it's true maybe of reds as well. It's something about the kind of chemical and pigment composition of red to orange kind of paints, is they tend to be a little bit thinner. I think because otherwise they would get muted by whatever had to be mixed in to make them thicker. I don't know enough actually about the chemistry or the kind of makeup of paint to really know, but that just seems to be the trend. Anyway, I also have, so far in the last video and the first few things there, I often work in the bigger areas. I often work with acrylics, but then I have these, one of the ones I grabbed that sort of olive toned, it's one of these, it's an acrylic as well, but it's an acrylic gouache. So if anyone out there has worked with gouache, you know that they have this sort of, they're quite matte and they can be quite chalky almost. They've got a lot of, when they dry, they have a fair bit of kind of tooth to them, like unlike an acrylic, which can often feel plasticky. These gouaches at least have a very flat and very, they leave a texture that can pick up a lot of other media. So obviously if I go into this with pencil or colored pencil or chalk or any other sort of media where I need something a little bit, like they say, toothy. I need a little bit of grain there, or I need a little bit of texture for the media to kind of grab onto. The gouache are great for that. They also tend to be, the colors are very strong. These are what are they? They're whole bean like acryl gouache. I should have looked up the name before I started talking about them, but they're quite nice, and they're not cheap necessarily for the size of those tubes, but I use them a bit more sparingly than I might use those tubes of acrylic, which are bigger. But I'm just quite drawn to the colors, and some of the really the only kind of, in terms of paint, the only kind of neon or kind of phosphorescent kind of glowing paints that I use are in those gouaches, because they, like I say, they really have, because they're so opaque, those kind of like a neon-y kind of orange can actually work in that kind of paint, because it's got the right kind of chemistry. Again, talking more than I should be about the kind of chemistry of paint, because I don't really know that much. But I guess this is what I'm talking about here is kind of knowing what I at least want from these materials and testing the boundaries of them. But knowing that I want certain textures, especially, like I say, that I know that I want to draw either below or on top of these paint levels. And so I don't want something that is going to be sort of like drawing on top of wax or drawing on top of plastic or something like that. That never really works out very well. I'll do it sometimes. I have this one titanium white acrylic that when I put that on, it just looks like a slab of plastic. And that can be sort of interesting, because it's almost like, it is like I've laid down a slab of plastic, but I can paint it on, so it can be whatever sort of shape I want that to be. Anyway, I'm not doing that here, but here I go again with, so now just sort of, I've got this, so I have the little bin of paper scraps. I also tend to keep, you can see here, there's that sort of sub bag of paper scraps. I'm not really sure why I have both. I think the original intention was that the bag would hold smaller and more kind of cut bits, but you can see that I haven't really followed through on that. Both are just filled with all sorts of random bits and pieces. So in some ways I should go through this bin and sort it a little bit. In other ways, I kind of like the grab bagness of maybe not even finding the thing I'm looking for if I happen to be looking for something specific, which I'm not always, but it maybe allows for me to have a level of surprise, because part of how I make these drawings is to essentially surprise myself by, sometimes it's surprise through the inconsistency of putting down the paint the way I might want to put down the paint. So it's not a precise thing. And so there's going to be, like I say originally with that palette knife, dragging it across that paper, it's not going to really do what I want it to do necessarily. It's going to kind of do its own thing under that palette knife. I'm making decisions. I'm kind of making a movement. So I'm going to get a bit of, let's say I want sort of a diagonal motion with the paint under the palette knife. I can get a bit of that, but it's still, it's imprecise, like I say. So anyway, back to me kind of rooting through all these little bits of paper. It's nice for me that this is like just a bit of everything in here. So like last time, I've chosen a few things that I've made. So those kind of orange dots and the dark black on gray paper, that's stuff I've made myself just with spray paint and some stencils. I made like a big cardboard stencil that had a bunch of these big circles on it, and then was able to just sort of spray onto the paper and again be kind of not all that precise. I wanted the circles to not be sharply stenciled, but that you can tell I'm you can see even in the back there, that page is still very wet. And I guess because of that, I think like in the last one I'm choosing, I'll stick down these bits of paper with acrylic medium here because things are already wet. I can't exactly put some glue stick on there or something. So it makes more sense to sort of be more painterly, even though what I'm doing is applying paper. That scrap, just as a happenstance, it's a bit of some kids' old school notebook, and it has a kind of a grid that they've drawn themselves on it. It's lined paper, but then they've drawn a grid, and so I'm sort of like, because I've recently had that tendency of drawing grids myself as I'm drawing. It's interesting to have sort of a pre-made grid like that, and made by someone else's hand. I've joked, mostly between Gil and I, that some of the, like, we have these kids' notebooks and that sort of thing. That's kind of like a collaboration with some kid, who knows even how old they are or if they're still alive, because a lot of the notebooks that I'm pulling things out of are actually from the 1930s or 40s, something like that. Some of them are newer than that, but there was an era a few years back when, from the junk shop we always went to, we kept on finding this whole range of it seemed like someone's, most of the stuff was probably from an estate sale or something like that, had dropped off. It sort of seemed like someone had passed and it was their collection of childhood stuff, and I guess someone else didn't feel that they needed to keep it. So there's something interesting in having that kind of history there, but I don't. That's not intentional either. Like I don't know anything about that person, and so I'm not assuming that they're really that I'm pulling anything of them into this. But anyway, still there's this kind of joke of like sometimes there'll be bits of handwriting or little bits of drawing or something like that on those pages, and it's an interesting type of found collage media to bring in because it's so specifically made by someone else. There's obviously a long history of kind of, these wouldn't be ready-mades exactly because they're only forming a small piece of what I'm making, but anyway, I find it interesting to. I think I actually like that kind of collage material more than like cutting something. I do occasionally cut things out of books and that sort of thing. But for these drawings, I like that most of these little bits of paper are really not specifically anything. They're just sort of shapes, colors, forms, and that sort of thing. So just like to start there. What I do, like obviously I've chosen a bunch of different scraps there. That was sort of, I don't have a plan for those on this. It's sort of just grabbing things as I felt they were interesting. Maybe it was the shape of the paper already. Maybe it was what was on the paper. In that case, it was just this, that's a piece of just really, that sort of, that really cheap black construction paper that you might have in, those kids art books, kind of a thick book of different colored construction papers. They're always kind of the cheapest papers, like poorly dyed, very pulpy. That's what that black sheet is there. So it has an interesting kind of warm black quality to it because it's not really, it doesn't have a lot of pigment in it. And I'm sort of, I put a lot of medium on it because I actually wanted it to be kind of infused and actually get a little bit, not darker, but I don't know. I wanted the surface of that to really be drawable. I think is part of that. I guess talking tools, you can see I've got that big palette knife, but then I also have these other little. I tend to use a lot of tools that maybe I'm not using them to the specific purpose, but I think mostly people would use these small palette knives if they were working with oils or something like that, like thick media, and they really want to shape and scrape around. But they're handy even just as I often use them less for paint and more for this kind of just kind of spreading media around. All that to say that I think like the materials that go on, the tools that I use are all sort of, I'm testing the waters half the time. I'm thinking here. That's why sort of nothing's happening. I'm not sure where I want to go next on this. And I think especially it's interesting when I have the motion of the paint below and I'm putting paper on top of it. There's a decision-making process there of like, well, how much of this do I actually want to cover? I like the putting paper on top of the paint because it has that different texture, like it's going to be more drawable, but it also can form these more geometric areas on top of color and kind of block it off in a more hard-edged kind of way. Although I prefer, like you can see, I kind of like I like some of the edges of the paper to be clean and other edges to be kind of either torn or kind of angled or cut into. I don't tend to do as many pure rectangular, like hard edge rectangular forms. I will occasionally, but it's more the I don't know. There's something just sort of naturalizing, I guess, about having like a little bit of that little torn edge can make something feel a little bit softer or more natural, like I say. So you can see I've already, of the paper I brought out, I already put back a few. I realized that I had that very bright neon green that I bring, it's funny, I bring out that, I have a few scraps of that neon green paper and I bring it out occasionally, and it never, I would say never, it doesn't often actually make it, even if I grab it as a possibility. It's not a color I would go for as readily, I guess, unless maybe the palette here were different. I think that green wouldn't have really worked in this case. You know, I do have a bit of green, but it's more that, it's like that kind of olive green color. Now I'm deciding again. Like I was going obviously for. Sometimes I have those big circles, and once I put down one circle, I'm not sure exactly if I want to repeat that, because it can feel like I've talked about in one of the other the video I did, sort of doing a bit of a tour of this ledger. Sometimes the big circles on the page can read as a bit planetary or something like that, and sometimes I like that because I guess I feel the same way, and other times I don't want that to come through as the intention. So I'll sometimes avoid that use of big circles. For whatever reason, the smaller circles, when I use those, they don't feel as, like I say, planetary or referential or something like that. They feel more just like graphic forms. I'm just doing a bit of cleanup at this point, because I want some of the that acrylic medium to be on top of this paper, but not too much, because if it's kind of lumpily on top, then it gets harder to draw on top of, like I say. And also I find when it's still wet, and as part of sticking them down, I will have moved bits of paint onto those bits of paper, so I can actually wipe it off at that point while it's still wet, using it's just like a baby wipe, like I said in the last video. So now it gets one of these tricky points where I think I'm taking the time here to sort of tidy up, which I wouldn't normally do, because the page there is still pretty wet, and I'm trying to save myself from myself, because my impulse here is to grab one of the pencils and start scribbling, making different marks, that sort of thing. So that's why sometimes doing this kind of like, I don't keep any of these tools overly pristinely cleaned or anything, but I'm taking the time here even just to like clean bits of paint off the surface, that sort of thing, because I know I don't want to mess with that wet surface. Here we go, pencil time. Now this is the kind of mark making I do when I just want to get some, so this isn't really scribbly, it's kind of like, it's a bit geometric, and it's more just sort of like finding spots where I want to make sure there is there are these kind of lateral lines, but then a little bit of, now I'm scribbling, but it's just to sort of fill in the space in a not very descript way. Like, obviously at this distance, you can't even really tell what I'm doing. It may even look like I'm not doing much at all, but it's so that those, the painted surface and the paper surface on top of it don't feel as separate from each other once the lines go on top and the lines cross between the painted surface and the paper, and then it just all sort of feels like those are on the same plane. That sounds sort of technical, but it's not really that. Like, as I'm doing it, I'm not thinking about all that much. It's just there's obviously intention there, but it's not. I'm not methodical in that way. As much as I'm making decisions, I'm also they're spur of the moment decisions. So I'm sort of, it's like improv with myself, essentially, is what these all boil down to. Just like this, okay, and then and this and this and this. And then occasionally, sometimes there's a few too many ands and ands and ands, and I'll get into a place where I've kind of overdone it in terms of mark making or overdone it in terms of layers. But I don't know what in this sort of thing. I'm sure someone would say that there's a kind of right or wrong way to do abstraction, but I don't know if I. I know when I like the final drawing, whatever like means for this kind of thing, but I know when I feel satisfied with it, and I know when I don't. So that sort of feels like right and wrong, but I don't. Right and wrong still aren't the right words, and good and bad still certainly aren't the right words. It's all of these drawings are just it's just kind of a series of prompts, a series of actions and reactions, just to see where things go. And also just to, like I said in the previous video, just to make the marks and to kind of go through the experience of starting from nothing, or in this case, like one of the reasons that I enjoy working in this book particularly is that I never feel like I'm really starting from nothing, because there's already this grid, this strange, because it's this accountancy ledger, like the grid itself is not it's not a unified grid. It's not a fixed measured grid. Like, it doesn't go, it's not it's not a 10 millimeter square grid or something like that. It's got columns, it's got rows, like a spreadsheet, essentially, accounting. And those columns are different widths, and the rows actually are different widths. So there's a grid there, but it kind of does its own thing. So that's interesting as a starting place, because, like I say, it means that there isn't, not starting from a blank page. And that's part of why this book originally, the book was compelling, like this old ledger was compelling as a thing to do work in. I had no idea what sort of work I would do in this book, but it was compelling just because it was already a really novel and kind of there's a beauty in the book, and there was an initial hesitation of doing anything in it. But then what would it be? It would just be a rather large book that would just sit around forever. So better that I started making these marks in it. But anyway, part of the interest of working in this book and also the kind of the way the book helps me work is that I can start from a place where there's already something there. And, talking earlier about that sort of sense of collaboration with some kid from the 1930s who was doing their vocabulary homework or something like that in a notebook, and me using a scrap of paper from that book. That's kind of a starting place where I'm saying I don't need to start with me. I can start with another reference point and then add myself on top of it. Interestingly, like connected with that, I guess, I mentioned in one of the other videos, I mentioned my friend Aaron, and we did a whole series of drawings together that were basically kind of like, they were collaborative without us directly collaborating in a sense, in that I would start a drawing and he would finish the drawing, or he would start a drawing and I would finish the drawing. And by finish, I mean we were working mostly on birch panels of various sizes. We started by doing a whole bunch, about I think 40 in the end, 6x6 birch panels. And so the starting and the ending was whatever either of us wanted to put down as a first layer, and then we would hand that panel off to the other one, and we both gave each other the permission to do whatever we wanted with that, to cover up any amount of the previous layer, to reference the previous layer, to work around it, or to work with it, to augment it, to add to it. It was a really fascinating and really enjoyable process, and we ended up having just a fantastic gallery show at the end of that, with I think we had 50 pieces in the end, and a few fairly large, we I think 9 12 by 12 works in that, which were interesting, going from smaller, the sort of 6x6 kind of starting place, to the 12 by 12 was interesting. Anyway, that's sort of like a literal literal collaboration, but also, like I say, starting from that place of having something there already, and reacting to that. So what I'm doing in these drawings is mostly trying to provide that for myself. So, that initial paint layer goes down, and then I think, okay, well, what would go on top of that? Like, I don't think it in that I plan it out, but I, like I say, I react to my own actions. I react to what's in front of me there visually. What I'm doing now is like I did in a previous video, is I've got I forget what book I'm actually looking at here. I think it's actually a book of it's a World War II history book or something like that. That it just has some interesting graphics in it, so I don't have it there for the historical content. But there was, like I often do, I was looking in there to see if there was any sort of like words that jumped out at me, or a reference point, or a phrase, or something that made me put something down. I've already put obviously some text on here, but occasionally it's that once I put down one set of text, I'll sometimes want to balance that text with something else that's associated. Okay, this is I've had for the past, I don't know how many drawings I've done this on, but quite a few. This is another repeated thing. So I said in the previous drawing, I do those sort of registration point plus signs. I've often also done, I don't know how many times now, I've done this A-B, and it kind of, there goes one of those registration points. The A-B, I used to also, another running thing that I haven't done for a while, but I used to also do I/O, which is like, input, output. they're kind of a reference to the same thing. And what they are is what they refer to in my head anyway, and it doesn't have to mean anything in the drawing, but it's again that action reaction. So it's a this and that, the association between one thing and another, the comparison of those two things. Like I guess some people might look at A, B and think the order of things, letters of the alphabet, that sort of thing. Some people might think of A and B as, maybe possible other letters as a series of choices, thinking like an A/B test that someone might do as a, to test the validity of something. So it can have a bunch of meanings, which I like. There would just be these, throughout the whole ledger and beyond, obviously, throughout all the artwork I've done over the past, really, I started doing this form of artwork, like this kind of abstract form artwork in around 2016. So it's been a while now, but there's been a series of recurring marks throughout that, and recurring kind of patterns in the type of mark making and the type of layering that I do, whether I'm working on a big wooden board or I'm working like this on paper, or I've done a bit of like kind of cardboard assemblage now and again. There's repeated forms, repeated practices, and sometimes literally kind of these repeated marks, or whether they're letters or actually they're just kind of marks. I used to do a lot of like chevron kind of arrows in my work. I haven't done those in a while. I used to do a lot of connected kind of dashed lines. Those occasionally show up. So obviously here I feel like I'm looking at this and I'm trying to figure out whether there's something else needed to kind of balance. I think because I have that, sometimes it's about the kind of visual weight of things, where because I have that big slab of the black on the bottom, and I have that kind of light, very kind of peachy pink, with the almost like sunrise, like I told you, those big dots always feel kind of like planetary or celestial. But anyway, there's something. I felt like there was something missing in there, as that kind of mid left side. So I'm trying to see if this other black shape would balance that. Turns out no. So then I'm like, oh, okay. I picked out that big orange dot for a reason originally. So now I've gone back to that. I think I'm looking for. I've got a fairly large circle template. I think that my point here is to see if I can. I didn't want all the gray of that, and so I wanted just to bring the circle down, and you can see I'm picking kind of a big enough circle so that I don't have to be. I've almost like, in the end, I've actually chosen to make this a bit more planetary, like almost like it's an orange moon. Like there's that little bit of a waning kind of edge on it, and so anyway, I put the circle away kind of to avoid that, and in the end, it feels like I wanted that shape coming back. But like I say, the fact that these read as kind of planetary or something like that isn't my intent here. That it's I'm not trying for that, but I do have this. I have this affinity for these dots, as you can tell. The dots have been, since I started doing this kind of work, like I say, back in 2016. Dots were one of the first things I did. I actually cut out all of these. I made a bunch of I did a bunch of kind of rough painting on paper, cut a whole bunch of dots out of that paper, and that was some of the first stuff I put down in these, not knowing what kind of, I kind of got these very big wooden panels just because I wanted to challenge myself to work bigger and work differently, and circles were some of the very first things. I'm not sure, obviously the circle as a visual form is compelling. Most geometric shapes have some sort of compelling nature to them, but something obviously about the circle of the, it's the single-sidedness of it. It's sort of a single edge, or if you think of it differently, it's sort of infinite edges, like a circle pulls your eye around in a loop constantly. So they sort of, that circular form kind of draws you in, but like I said about the kind of grid of circle forms, like I've got down there at the bottom, and I've got a version of kind of the semicircles at the top. I think of those as sort of they pull back. They're kind of a grounding circle, but I've never really figured it out exactly, like why I'm specifically drawn to the circle forms, but there's something. And I find, for instance, I brought out that big circle template. I have a similar one that is all ellipses, and I've tried to use it, and I don't like using the ellipse at all. So it's not like curvy forms. It's specifically those circles that I go back to. So now I'm at a stage in this where now that I've got that other circle there, the balance feels a lot better. I've kind of got a left and a right. I've got that kind of well going through the center. And now another word has come into my head. I think this may have been a word that was from the book that I picked up earlier. But this is a tricky thing, because this is like an impulse to like do more. But sometimes when I go in and start writing things, there are regrets. So part of this, I'm making some decisions to, instead of write a single word out, because I didn't want to have, the word I had in my head was direction or directional. And instead of wanting that long, the kind of visual of a long word, I wanted to break it up and keep it within that blue form. You can see, you can almost, there's something even about the way I moved after like putting in those letters, that sometimes I feel like I'm like, did I just mess that up? Like I say, again, like what's right and wrong in these cases, I'm not really sure, but there's kind of right and wrong in the moment, and whether that ends up being wrong as an end result is something else. like I said in the previous thing, I've been doing a bit of this grid, this extra kind of grid making. Like it's almost like a last step, adding some of these grids on top of things. Sometimes what I was doing there, sometimes the ruler acts as a blocking device. If I want to see like the page without something, or if I just want to see a section of the page, I can kind of move the ruler around, and it's about the establishing like where does this need more. I mean, at this point, I don't know if it needs more at all. I probably could have stopped before putting down that text that ended up in the blue there, but once it was there, it kind of, again, that's like a nod to myself to like, okay, well, I did that, now what? And like I say, I can get into situations where the action or reaction, the improvisation can lead me into strange places occasionally. But sometimes the result is great. So it's why I work this way. It's why I kind of prefer to work to improvise with myself as my partner, basically. Like I say, it was great fun to have an actual other person as a partner in making artwork as an improvisational kind of experiment. But when I'm doing this stuff on my own, it's obviously I've got to provide that by myself. So now I really am getting close to the finish here, and there's certainly a sense of like I say, there can be a bit of a fear of like, okay, not too many more marks. But there was something in this one, like I actually wanted to, because I put in the grids, because I have some clear, I started with that very nondescript paint at the very beginning, like no sense of grid or anything like that. And then I kind of ended here with wanting to delineate those rectangular forms even further. Okay, so that hadn't appeared yet in this one. I will often do. I've like a circle. I've loved arrows of various sorts for a long time, and so arrows make an appearance quite frequently in my drawings, and oftentimes they're there to suggest an internal kind of motion. Like in that case, it's sort of like the arrow is curved, moving around that orange circular form. And I was debating there, am I done? Turns out no. I laugh at myself sometimes because like I say now, this is it's like one of those movies where you're sure it has ended, and then it turns out, oh no, that was sort of a false ending, and then now it's the end. Oh no, not done yet. Sometimes drawings like that can be like that for me, where I think I'm done, and then I'm not. I think I'm done, and then I'm not. I may be there now with this one. It's really just making those final choices. It's funny, you can see even in my the behavior of my hands, there's kind of a nervousness of I guess almost like wanting to continue to make marks because that is my impulse, but then it's kind of my brain talking to my hands and saying like, no, you probably shouldn't do anymore, but maybe you will anyway. And then here I go. I think here it was just like I said, I wanted to kind of strengthen the edges of some of those rectangular forms. Yeah, in this case, it was like I wanted to, like I said at the way back, that piece of paper that's there with the semicircles already had a grid on it, but over time here, I've actually sort of redrawn over top of that same grid, so it went off of the page onto the rest of the space around it. Still, pencil still in hand. Marks could still happen. I think it's like I have those words, eyes, ears, there, and I think I was like, do I do more there? Words especially are tricky. Once you're using words, they can either feel they can there's a niceness about them. Like I've said, they're shapes in themselves, they're gestural, but they also can be a little bit too specific sometimes. So here I obviously open, I wrote the word open in reaction to eyes and ears. And now I was sitting down there, and I've actually kind of stood up, backed away to see, just get a slightly different view, and then can't help myself. Gotta just get in there with a few more marks. But again, it's these, especially when, so that's a water soluble pencil, but obviously I'm just using it like a pencil. They're marks that don't have a big effect, but they contribute to this kind of overall depth and motion that I keep going back to. And also, they make, because I'm going over top of everything here, like making those, I'm barely touching when I'm making those kind of big gestures with the pencil. But what it does is like kind of flattens all that stuff, while it's got depth, but it also kind of keeps it all on the same layer, if that makes any sense. All right, well, thanks for watching another one of these. I'll have a couple more in the coming days. And here's a kind of close up of where I ended there. So you can actually now see the text. So that sort of broken up text there with hyphens, you can kind of spell a few different words there. You can spell misinform, you can spell misdirect, you can spell indirect, you can spell indirection, you can spell direction. So I like doing it. It's nothing overly complex, but little kind of word games I'm playing with myself. All right, well, thanks for watching, everyone. Titles. Plan for seeing.